In the spring of 1221, a desperate prince named Jalal ad-Din stood in the mountain passes of Afghanistan and made a choice that should have guaranteed his destruction. Behind him lay the charred remains of the Khwarazmian Empire. Once the richest power in Central Asia, now nothing but burned cities and mountains of skulls left by the armies of Genghis Khan. Every major center from Samarkand to Bukhara had been wiped off the map. Their populations were butchered to the last surviving child. Jalal ad-Din's father, the Shah, had fled in panic and died on a barren island, leaving his son alone to face the Mongol onslaught. With only about 30,000 fighters gathered from the ruins of the empire, Jalal ad-Din confronted a Mongol force that had never tasted a decisive defeat. But instead of running like every other commander, instead of relying on the mobility of his horsemen to counter the Mongols, he issued an order that sounded completely deranged. He told his cavalry to get off their horses, to abandon their mounts, and to fight as foot archers beside his infantry. Every bit of military logic insisted this was suicide. To understand how reckless this truly was, you have to understand what the Mongols had already done to anyone who resisted. In 1219, the Khwarazmian Empire was a major superpower. Its cities were masterpieces of Persian architecture, with populations in the hundreds of thousands. Its armies were vast and well-equipped with the best armor and weapons Persian craftsmen could build. When Genghis Khan sent a trading caravan to establish peaceful relations, the Khwarazmian governor of Otrar didn't just reject it, he executed the ambassadors and merchants, killing around 150 men. Muhammad II then made the disaster worse by approving his governor's actions. Genghis Khan's answer was total annihilation. Roughly 200,000 Mongol warriors moved with eerie precision, besieging several cities at once, even though deserts separated them by hundreds of miles. Samarkand, with a population of about 400,000, fell in only 5 days. Its people were slaughtered, except for the 30,000 artisans taken as slaves. Bukhara, a center of Islamic scholarship, was burned after its inhabitants were marched out to die. The violence was not random. Every act was meant to terrorize. At Nishapur, after a Mongol prince was killed during the siege, Genghis Khan ordered the city erased completely. When it fell, the Mongols spent 6 days killing without pause. They executed every living thing: men, women, children, and animals. Medieval accounts claim 1.7 million were killed, though modern historians estimate closer to 200,000, still horrific beyond comprehension. The Mongols piled severed heads into pyramids sorted by gender. At Merv, possibly the largest city on Earth at the time, with 700,000. To 1 million inhabitants, the Mongols promised mercy if the city surrendered. Once the gates opened, they spent nearly 2 weeks killing everyone except about 400 artisans. One survivor, a woman who hid among corpses, later tried to count the dead. She reached 1,300,000 before giving up. In less than 2 years, an empire that had taken centuries to build vanished completely. Jalal ad-Din had watched this nightmare consume his world. About 30 years old, a prince raised for war, he found himself facing an enemy no one understood. His father had broken down mentally the moment the Mongols invaded. Instead of rallying a defense, Muhammad too fled from one city to the next in blind panic, leaving his people to be massacred. He eventually fled to a lonely island in the Caspian Sea, where he died of illness and despair, having literally run himself to death. Jalal ad-Din refused to follow that path. As the empire collapsed, he gathered what troops he could find, men who had survived burned cities. Refugees who had lost everything, soldiers whose families had been butchered. These weren't polished professional units. These were men driven by grief and rage, with nothing left except revenge. He led them into Afghanistan, hoping the rugged mountains would slow the Mongols and give him a chance to use terrain to counter their speed. The Mongol force chasing him was commanded by Shigi Kutuk, one of Genghis Khan's adopted sons and a seasoned general who had helped win countless victories. His army numbered around 30,000 expert horse archers, trained since childhood to fight together as a single deadly machine. Mongol warriors grew up riding before they could walk. They mastered composite bows strong enough to pierce armor at 200 yards. Each one kept several spare horses to rotate between, allowing them to travel immense distances in a single day. Their tactics were lethal. Advance in loose waves, rain arrows from out of reach, avoid close combat, until the enemy broke feign retreat's lure. Pursuers into traps surround anyone who stood still and run down anyone who tried to escape. They seemed unbeatable. No Chinese, Persian, or European commander had figured out how to stop them. But Jalal ad-Din had noticed something critical. The Mongols relied on movement and ranged firepower. They almost never committed to prolonged hand-to-hand fighting. Their entire system depended on controlling distance and maintaining mobility. So Jalal ad-Din devised a strategy that looked insane but might be the only thing that could work. When scouts reported the Mongols approaching the Panja Valley in late 1221, he positioned his force with the mountains, sealing off any escape. Then he did the unthinkable. He ordered his cavalry to fight on foot, about 20,000 horsemen, men who had trained their whole lives to fight from the saddle. Dismounted and formed tight infantry and archer blocks. Only 10,000 cavalry remained mounted on the flanks. Those on foot became a human fortress and able to move, but solid, disciplined, and capable of steady long-range fire without managing frightened horses. When Shigi Kutuk arrived and saw this, he must have been baffled. Every other opponent either tried to emulate Mongol speed or hid behind walls. No one had ever thrown away their own mobility on purpose. The Mongols began with their usual opening. Light cavalry advanced and released huge volleys of arrows meant to break enemy morale. A Mongol archer could fire 15 to 20 arrows a minute. With 30,000 of them, the first minutes of battle could see 500,000 arrows in the air. Survivors compared the noise to non-stop thunder. Against cavalry, this caused formations to collapse. Against city defenders, the Mongols usually just peppered the walls endlessly until the defenders broke. But Jalal ad-Din's foot archers were different. These were veteran fighters who had already seen the Mongols destroy everything they loved. Fear meant nothing to them. They locked shields, absorbed the arrow storm, and kept their ranks tight. And because they were grounded and stable, they could fire back with surprising accuracy. A mounted archer must compensate for a moving horse. A foot archer simply aims. For the first time in their history, Mongol arrows weren't cracking the line. The Mongols tried a feigned retreat, expecting Jalal ad-Din's men to chase and fall into a trap. But the prince had ordered them to stay rooted no matter what. They didn't budge. They just kept firing. This broke Mongol expectations completely. Their enemies usually either fled in panic or pursued the retreat into ambush. Jalal ad-Din's troops did neither.
Hours passed.
The Mongols fired until their quivers were empty, something that almost never happened. Shigi Kutuk tried direct charges, but the dense blocks of shields and the accurate counterfire killed horses before they reached the line. Finally, as the sun beat down and both sides wore themselves thin, Jalal ad-Din saw his moment. The Mongols had poured everything into trying to smash the center, leaving their flanks stretched and vulnerable. He gave the signal. His 10,000 fresh cavalry, waiting all day on the wings, charged. Their horses were rested. Their morale was sky-high after watching their comrades hold out. They crashed into the Mongol sides with devastating effect. Exhausted, low on arrows, and suddenly attacked from both front and flank, the Mongol formations collapsed. Panic swept through troops who had never known defeat. They tried to flee through the mountain passes, but Jalal ad-Din's cavalry chased them mercilessly. Thousands of elite Mongols died in the rout. Modern estimates say that 10,000 to 15,000 Mongols were killed or scattered, more than they lost conquering the entire Khwarazmian Empire. Word of the victory spread across the Islamic world, and Jalal ad-Din became a hero overnight. His army swelled to nearly 70,000 men, larger than any force that had opposed the Mongols since the beginning of the war. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He had defeated a Mongol army, not Genghis Khan himself. Infuriated by the loss, Genghis Khan swore to personally destroy Jalal ad-Din. The main Mongol army, 50,000 elite troops, swept across every region that supported him, obliterating cities with terrifying speed. Jalal ad-Din was forced to retreat constantly. Genghis Khan refused to fight unless the terrain and conditions were ideal. At the Indus River late in 1221, Jalal ad-Din found himself surrounded. With the river behind him and the full Mongol horde closing in, he tried to recreate his dismounted archer formation, but this time the Mongols ignored the center. They swung around both flanks and completely enveloped his army. The immobile formation couldn't pivot quickly enough to face attacks from every direction. Chaos erupted. Men fled toward the riverbanks. Cornered on the cliffs above the Indus, Jalal ad-Din made a desperate decision. He mounted his horse and jumped off a 40-foot drop into the raging river while still in full armor. Somehow he survived, swam across, and crawled out alive on the opposite bank as Mongol arrows splashed around him. When he looked back, Genghis Khan stood above, watching him escape. The Khan reportedly told his sons, "A son should be like that," praising Jalal ad-Din's bravery even while vowing to kill him. Genghis sent riders after him, but Jalal ad-Din vanished into India. For the next decade, he wandered from court to court trying to build a new army, but he never regained the strength he'd had at Parwan. In 1231, Mongol scouts found him, and he died in a small skirmish in Kurdistan. With his death, his groundbreaking tactic died with him. He had discovered one of the few practical counters to Mongol warfare: stable infantry, disciplined archery from the ground, and fresh cavalry reserves. But no one survived to spread his method. Later commanders had to figure out similar ideas on their own. The Mamluks at Angelut in 1260 used comparable strategies, but they developed them independently, unaware that Jalal ad-Din had done it decades earlier. The Battle of Parwan remains a haunting what-if. What if Jalal ad-Din had lived long enough to train new generals? What if his ideas had spread before the Mongols adapted? But the cruel twist of fate is that his greatest triumph sealed his doom. By defeating the Mongols, he ensured that Genghis Khan would never stop hunting him. Had he fled into quiet exile, he might have lived comfortably as a guest prince. Instead, he chose to fight, and that choice made Genghis Khan determined to erase him from history. His victory at Parwan made him a symbol of resistance, something the Mongol Empire could not allow to exist. Fear of Mongol invincibility was the glue that held their world together, and Jalal ad-Din shattered that illusion. If one man could defeat them, others might try. Genghis Khan understood that better than anyone, so he destroyed every city that helped Jalal ad-Din and wiped out every tribe that supported him, ensuring no trace of rebellion remained. History did not remember Jalal ad-Din for his brilliant success, but for his desperate escape and lonely death. The 30,000-foot archers who once halted the unstoppable Mongols became a forgotten footnote. Their victory at Parwan was buried under the weight of Mongol vengeance. Genghis Khan made sure the world remembered the cost of defiance, not the hope of victory. Jalal ad-Din proved the Mongols were not unbeatable, but proving it doomed him. His courage inspired thousands, yet condemned him to be hunted without mercy. The man who defeated the Mongols became a wandering legend, admired, feared, and eventually forgotten. His triumph at Parwan was not a turning point, but a brief, brilliant flash showing that even the mightiest empires can be challenged.